making hard Christmas candy with the Morrison family, circa late 1960s. How many of you have ever made hard candy? I don't know the official name for it, but in my parents' house it was called Christmas candy, because that's when we made it, at Christmas time. The action actually began weeks before Christmas and not only involved my entire family, but the neighbors sort of got into the act also. In the weeks leading up to candy night, Dad and Mom would stock up on the needed supplies, which included Karo syrup, granular sugar, powdered sugar, and a variety of flavoring oils. I have a lot of great memories growing up as a kid in the mid to late 1960s in Bridgeport, Michigan. But looking back on those years, they seem almost as if they were magical. I will never forget the mouth-watering aroma of the various oils used for the candy as they filled the house, especially, my favorite, cinnamon, and, of course, root beer also. Most people, when making the candy, will pour the molten syrup onto a cool table or cupboard to let it harden there. When sufficiently hardened, they whack it with a hammer and soon would have hundreds of pieces of candy, but along with a lot of tiny little slivered pieces. Because of that, there was a lot of waste in doing it this way. We did it differently. When the liquid in the pot reached a certain temperature, soft boil on the candy thermometer, Mom or Dad would pour it on our kitchen table, which had been dusted with powdered sugar. As it would begin to stiffen up, we would cut it into pieces. Trouble was that the mixture was still pretty hot when we began cutting it, and it was very easy to singe your fingers, and I remember more than once doing that. But backing up a little, a few days ahead of candy night, my brother Bill and sister Roseanne would make the rounds to the neighbors' houses, gathering up extra pairs of scissors. Our neighbors, the Brennans and Shepherds, Reeds, and others, were happy to lend them, as they knew they would be returned, with a small mason jar containing a generous portion of that delectable finished product. We always made a lot of it, too. Besides the flavors I already mentioned, there was also spearmint, lemon, anise, and one time we tried apple. Not only did the neighbors contribute jars, but Mom saved jelly jars and other fancy containers. She collected them all year long, and it seems there was always just enough to make it. I remember snippets of our yearly production, which was truly a fun experience. But however, there is one candy night which stands out boldly. You see, a blizzard was in full force that night. It was a dangerous night. It was a dangerous storm, harrowing indeed. But we went on undaunted by the many problems which came up that night, and arrived the problems did. The wind was so strong that it shook our house. Ours was a very sturdy place, so it had to be pretty intense to accomplish that. The snow was being whipped about, forming huge drifts, and frequently the lights would flicker. Had the power went off, it would have put an end to the production before it even began. But alas, despite the raging storm, the power stayed on. One of us, my brother Bill, probably wished more than once that night that the power would indeed have gone out, and I couldn't blame him if he had. You see, in the process of making the candy, Mom discovered a glaring oversight on her part, or Dad's part. They had forgotten to buy the powdered sugar, an essential ingredient. Dad got bundled up and went out with the intent of driving to Weber's IGA on the Dixie Highway to pick up some powdered sugar. It wasn't very far, less than 2 miles round trip. Dad hadn't even been out for 10 minutes when he came back in, stomping his feet to get the snow off from him. The car was snowbound, and there would be no moving it until the storm was done, and the driveway shoveled. What were we to do? Then all eyes fell on my brother Bill as my mom fetched her purse. Pulling out some money, she looked at my older brother and said, "It's up to you to save the night. Here is money. Cut through the cemetery across the road, and you should be back in no time." Bill's jaw dropped. I'm not going out into that blizzard, at least not alone. We all knew not to argue with Mom, because when her mind was made up, you might as well just hop to it. So Bill took the money, and as he was putting on his snowsuit, Mom was showing him the emptied powdered sugar package so that he would be sure and get the right thing, and she stuffed it into his coat pocket and reminded him to get that exact same product. Bill and I never got along. We just never liked each other very much. But I felt sorry for him having to go out on a night like that. And to top it off, through the cemetery no less. Now, while Bill was gone, everything else was made ready so we could jump right into the process when he arrived back home. Simple enough, right? Not knowing my brother Bill, it wasn't. See, my brother was not the brightest person. For some reason, his pistons always misfired, and they sure misfired good on that night. My brother made it all the way to Weber's and back. He was breathless when he walked in, and his cheeks were bright red. He sat the paper bag, because they didn't have plastic bags back then, young'uns. He sat that on the counter and began taking off his snow-packed shoes. The next sound was my mother's exclamation of shock. "You got flour! We can't use flour! Can't you do anything right?" A heated argument followed. Mom was determined to send him back, and I remember her saying, "You've got just enough time to get back over there before they close. Now come on, off with you. Oh, and take the flour back, for crying out loud." The arguing stopped. Bill knew he could not win. And Dad, well, he just kept quiet rather than incur Mom's wrath. He put back on the what clothes he had gotten out of and trudged back out into that howling wind and the great sheets of falling snow. He was hurrying, as he was going against a deadline. If the IGA was closed, well, I would not want to be in his snowshoes. But as slow as he was, mentally that is, he made it there and back with the right product in hand. But he did not look good at all. There was a huge lump on his forehead, which he had got by tripping over a headstone and crashing his forehead into another. Mom shook her head. "Why weren't you watching where you were going? Look at you. Your clothes are filled with are filled with snow. I suppose your head hurts too bad to help us make the candy, right?" I saw Dad roll his eyes, unbeknownst to Mom. Bill sort of exploded. "Not even a thank you? There was no light. It was darker than dark, Mom. You're lucky you got the sugar at all." As Bill explained, the bag had gotten tossed from his arms when he fell, and he had to find it again by just feeling his way. But Bill came through the experience, I would like to say smarter, but that wasn't possible, and I admit to being astonished that he actually did make it through. Bill was excused from the candy making that night, and the project went on without a hitch.